Before we begin, I thought it would be fun if everyone lets me know in the comments where they're watching this video from. And while you're down there, don't forget to subscribe. Now let's start today's episode. Dorene Ebert. Dorene Ebert, born on November 29, 1952, in California, came from a large family with 5 children. She was known for her kindness, positivity, and her desire to help others. This desire led her to pursue a career in physiotherapy after college. Moving to San Francisco, Dorene began working in her chosen field, but she also had a dream of building her own large family. At the age of 24, Dorene met Michael Dennis, a man who would later become her husband. The couple quickly connected, sharing similar values and aspirations, and soon they were married. Together, they started their own family, a dream Dorene had long cherished. However, their life took an unimaginable turn on Halloween night, when a simple evening at home would lead to a horrifying and tragic event. Michael Dennis worked at a factory near Dorene's clinic, and their relationship quickly blossomed, leading to marriage. In 1976, they welcomed their son, Paul, into the world. However, as time passed, the joy of parenthood began to strain their marriage. Within a year of Paul's birth, Dorene and Michael made the difficult decision to divorce. Their son, Paul, stayed with Dorene, but Michael maintained a regular presence in his life through visits. Despite the divorce, Dorene and Michael kept their relationship amicable, and she continued to move forward with her life. A year later, Dorene met a man named Charles, and they began dating. The couple soon married and moved to San Jose, where they settled in a peaceful residential neighborhood. In 1979, Dorene and Charles welcomed a daughter, Diana, further fulfilling their dream of a growing family. Like Dorene, Charles also envisioned a large, happy family, and their new life seemed promising. But little did they know, their world would soon be turned upside down by a tragedy that no one could have anticipated. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now let's move on with the video. Charles embraced Dorene's son, Paul, as his own, and the arrival of their daughter, Diana, brought them immense joy. However, in February of 1980, their world shattered when tragedy struck. Paul, just 4 years old, climbed over the fence surrounding their pool and fell into the water. Dorene, who was at home at the time, noticed too late. She rushed to pull her son from the pool and called for an ambulance. Paul was quickly transported to the hospital, where doctors connected him to a life support machine. Despite their best efforts, after 10 agonizing days, the doctors concluded that there was no chance of survival. The decision was made to disconnect him from life support. Dorene, utterly devastated, could not stop blaming herself for the accident, even though the police investigation cleared her of any wrongdoing. The loss of her son tore her apart, and she was left with a deep, unshakable sense of grief and guilt. Despite the lingering sadness from the loss of her son, Dorene found solace in her daughter Diana, who helped her through the grief. For years after the tragedy, there was finally a glimmer of hope for the family. Dorene and Charles had been trying for years to have another child, but 2 pregnancies had ended in miscarriage. However, this time, Dorene's pregnancy progressed well, and the couple eagerly awaited the arrival of a baby boy, due in early November. As Halloween approached, the family decided to participate in the festive activities. The neighborhood was alive with decorations, children running from house to house, and families enjoying the spirit of the season. Diana, now 4 years old, was especially excited about trick-or-treating. Despite being 9 months pregnant, Dorene couldn't say no to her daughter's enthusiasm and joined her for a night of Halloween fun. Charles stayed home, passing out candy to the neighborhood kids. Mother and daughter returned home shortly before 9 p.m., full of laughter and candy bags in hand. Little did they know, their evening would take a shocking and horrifying turn. Charles told his wife that they were running low on candy, so he planned to head to the nearest store to restock, not wanting to disappoint the neighborhood children. He left the house at around 8:50 p.m. and returned 15 minutes later. As he approached the house, he noticed the front door was slightly open, which seemed unusual. What he found inside, however, was a true nightmare. Upon entering, he saw his wife lying on the floor in the hallway, surrounded by a large amount of blood. Dorene appeared lifeless, prompting Charles to immediately call 911. As he moved further into the house, he found the body of their unborn child in the living room. In shock and disbelief, he struggled to process what he was seeing. At one point, he briefly wondered if Dorene had suffered a miscarriage, but he soon realized the situation was far worse. Next to the child, he saw a human hand. Charles immediately realized the hand belonged to Dorene. Understanding that someone had attacked his family, he began searching for his daughter, fearing she might also be in danger. The house was covered in blood, and in his frantic search, Charles even slipped and fell while rushing through the rooms. Thankfully, he found his daughter alive, hiding behind the sofa in the living room. When the ambulance arrived, paramedics detected a faint pulse in Dorene and quickly rushed her to the hospital. Sadly, they were unable to save her, and she passed away en route. The unborn child also did not survive. In addition to being removed from Dorene's womb, the baby had suffered multiple blows. Medical experts later determined that Dorene had been repeatedly struck with a long, sharp object, possibly a sword or machete. Meanwhile, the police investigated the house, which resembled a scene from a horrific horror movie. Later, several officers sought psychological help, as even they couldn't cope with what they had witnessed. Blood was everywhere, on the floor, walls, and even the ceiling. Investigators examined the entire house but didn't find the perpetrator or any clues. Outside the house, police saw bloody footprints on the sidewalk. They stopped in the middle of the road, leading investigators to believe the killer had gotten into a car at that spot. Soon, as Charles stated, they never owned such a mask. The evidence was sent to the laboratory, and police tried to talk to Diana. The girl was in complete shock, but she was the sole witness to what happened, and potentially could help identify the assailant. Diana told them that shortly after her father left for the store, someone knocked on their door. Dorene went to answer, and saw a man in a wolf mask holding a long blade. He told her, "I'm going to kill you now." After that, the woman screamed at her daughter to run out of the house, and the girl hid behind the sofa. Diana couldn't recall what happened next to the moment when her father found her. She also couldn't help the police identify the attacker, as he was wearing a wolf mask. Initially, investigators considered the victim's husband as a suspect. They found it suspicious how his trip to the store coincided with the arrival of the killer, as Dorene was attacked just minutes after her husband left home. When Charles returned, he stepped on blood multiple times, even falling and getting covered in it. Police didn't rule out the possibility that he might have done this intentionally to have an excuse for the blood on his clothes. However, detectives quickly found several inconsistencies in this theory. Firstly, Charles's shoes clearly didn't match those that left bloody footprints on the street. Secondly, the killer likely got into a car parked on the road in front of the house, but there were no blood traces found in Charles's vehicle, nor a different pair of shoes. Police went to the store Charles visited and spoke to the staff member. He confirmed that Charles did buy candies from him that evening, indicating he didn't have time to commit the murder. Surveillance footage from the store also supported this alibi, so detectives temporarily stopped considering him the prime suspect and asked Charles if he had anyone in mind who might wish harm to his family. And the men immediately pointed to Dorene's ex-husband, Michael. According to Charles initially, Michael maintained a normal relationship with his ex-wife, but everything changed after the death of their son, who drowned in the pool. Michael blamed Dorene, believing she deliberately killed the boy to cut all connections. He even filed a civil lawsuit against her, seeking to hold her responsible for the child's death, but lost the case. Even during the time when Michael and Dorene were still married, he occasionally behaved quite strangely. After the birth of their son, he often fell into depression, distancing himself from both his wife and child. Dorene believed all of this somehow connected to his childhood traumas. Michael had hearing problems from an early age, requiring him to constantly wear a bulky hearing aid. In those days, it was a rather large device, and because of it, Other children constantly teased Michael. All of this led to the man growing up introverted, practically having no friends, and avoiding interaction with women. Despite seemingly leaving these issues behind after meeting Dorene, Michael couldn't shake off his old problems completely. This became one of the main reasons for the couple's decision to divorce. When Dorene married Charles, Michael began harboring resentment and animosity towards her, especially disliking the fact that another man was raising his son. These feelings intensified after Paul's death, and he started genuinely hating his ex-wife. Michael also lost his job, where he had spent most of his adult life. This factor also had some negative effect on him. After hearing all of this, the detectives decided to go to the man's house and talk to him. Charles's account was clearly insufficient to make Michael the prime suspect, but since he lived only 2 miles from Dorene's house, they decided to pay him a visit right away. Officers arrived at his home around midnight and saw the pickup truck parked near the garage. They shined a flashlight inside and saw something resembling blood on the steering wheel and keys. Afterward, they knocked on the door, but nobody answered. The lights were on, and officers could hear water running inside the house, leading them to suspect that the man might be disposing of evidence or cleaning blood-stained clothes. So they continued knocking. Michael eventually opened the door. He remained calm, even after being informed about his ex-wife's murder. The man answered all their questions nonchalantly, and allowed the officers inside without a warrant. According to him, he went to the store during the day, returned home, and hadn't left since. Michael even agreed to sign voluntary consent papers to allow a search of his house. As he reached for the pen to sign, investigators noticed a deep cut on his right hand. Michael claimed he accidentally cut himself earlier while carving a pumpkin for Halloween. However, the police doubted his words. The wound was visibly fresh, and blood was still oozing from it. Meanwhile, a few officers started searching his house. Michael went upstairs with one of them since they asked him to show his ID. When they entered his bedroom, Michael reached for the bed headboard, but the officer immediately told him to step aside. His actions seemed suspicious. Why would he keep his documents behind the bed? When the officer approached, he saw a holster hanging on the bed headboard with a loaded gun inside. He took the weapon and led Michael downstairs to the other officers. Meanwhile, his colleagues discovered blood droplets on the floor, leading them to a washing machine in the garage and a pile of clothes with bloodstains. This was sufficient for an arrest, and they took the man into custody. Afterward, detectives, along with forensic experts, scrutinized the house more thoroughly, seeking evidence that might link Michael to the murder. The analysis of the blood would take a few days, and meanwhile the police found some new gruesome discoveries. At first, they uncovered an empty box for a machete with an 18-inch blade. Medical experts confirmed that this model perfectly matched the wounds on Dorene's body. Secondly, Michael had 2 makeshift coffins in his house, leading detectives to suspect they were intended for Dorene and her husband. Additionally, the police found body bags typically used by medical staff. Considering Michael had no association with these items, it raised significant concerns. Putting all these pieces together, the police went to the judge to request a warrant for the suspect's arrest for an extended period. Without it, they could only detain him for a limited time. However, the judge deemed the evidence too circumstantial. As a result, Michael had to be released, and the man walked free. Nevertheless, 3 days later, the detectives got the answer from the lab. Experts found 2 types of blood at the crime scene, belonging to different individuals. Blood type analysis revealed that the majority of it shared the same blood type as Dorene, with a small amount matching Michael's. Apparently, the man injured himself during the attack on his ex-wife. This time, the judge promptly issued an arrest warrant, and Michael was officially charged with the murder of his ex-wife and her unborn child. Soon, detectives found another piece of evidence linking him to the crime. Speaking with Michael's acquaintances, they learned he owned the exact same wolf mask found near Dorene's house. On the previous Halloween, he wore it to a party, and police even discovered a photo of Michael wearing the mask. To eliminate any doubts, they found in his home the exact clothing he wore in that photo. But the story of the mask didn't end there. To further strengthen the case, police interviewed all of Dorene's neighbors about that evening. It turned out that children going door to door for candy saw an adult man wearing a wolf mask standing across the street from the victim's house, staring at it. Notably, they spotted him around 7 p.m., 2 hours before the murder. Michael's trial began in July 1988, 4 years after the murder. Initially, he pleaded guilty, but later changed his plea. He didn't deny committing the murder, but claimed innocence due to mental health issues. A psychologist assigned to him concluded that he indeed had serious mental problems. Michael told him that he snapped because of Halloween. Witnessing other kids joyfully trick or treating remind him of Paul's death, triggering his breakdown. According to Michael, he went to Dorene's house with a machete on that evening. When she opened the door, he said, "You killed my son," and added that he intended to murder her. She immediately recognized the man behind the mask, screamed for her daughter to run, and in the second, Michael attacked her. He insisted that he was unaware of Dorene's pregnancy, a claim that seemed hard to believe. Standing at just 4 feet tall, all her friends insisted it was impossible not to notice her pregnancy. Before the tragedy, they even joked that because of her belly, Dorene had become broader than taller. The prosecution argued that the man was fully aware of his actions and had planned the crime in advance. During the investigation, detectives discovered he had told friends about his desire to kill his ex-wife and her husband, then dispose of their bodies in the bay. Given that they found 2 coffins and body bags in his home, the prosecution suggested he intended to carry out this plan, but changed his mind for some reason. Perhaps he panicked, or feared staying in the house too long, thinking he might get caught. Dorene's daughter, Diana, also gave testimony during the trial. At the time, she was 9 years old and still had a vivid recollection of the events. Though Charles wanted to shield his daughter from the trauma, she was the only person who had witnessed the crime. The trial lasted for a year, and in the end, Michael was found guilty of murdering both Dorene and her child. He was sentenced to death, but while awaiting execution, California implemented a moratorium on the death penalty. As a result, Michael remains incarcerated to this day, with little chance of his sentence being carried out anytime soon. Many years later, Diana shared that the memory of the murder haunted her throughout her life, constantly reminding her of the horrific events. Eventually, she chose to forgive Michael and try to move forward, fearing that holding on to the pain would lead her to lose her sanity. Moving on to the next case. Laurel Jean Mitchell. Laurel Jean Mitchell was born on May 24, 1958, in Whitley County, Indiana, to parents Richard and Wilma Mitchell. She grew up in North Webster, Indiana, alongside her siblings, Sarah and Bruce. At the time, North Webster had a population of around 500 and was considered a very safe community. It was a place where residents rarely locked their doors. Parents felt comfortable letting their children ride bikes freely around the traffic-free streets, and neighbors often spent hours socializing on their front porches. By 1975, Laurel, a 17-year-old senior at Wawasee High School, worked at Cokesbury Inn in the Epworth Forest neighborhood, situated on the shores of Webster Lake. For her, the job offered a perfect chance to gain valuable experience while earning some extra money. Laurel approached everything with determination and enthusiasm, fully investing herself in the role. Laurel Mitchell quickly became a favorite among both the staff and the customers at Cokesbury Inn. She was actively involved in her local church youth group and was also a member of a traveling singing group called God's Children. The group toured across the United States, recording music and releasing a couple of albums. Laurel was deeply religious, with her faith playing a central role in her life. Most of her free time was spent at church, and although she had the occasional disagreement with her siblings, she shared a strong and close-knit bond with them that only grew as time went on. Laurel was adored in her community, where her warm smile and kind demeanor won over everyone she met. One of her most cherished traits was her genuine kindness and caring nature, which made her particularly beloved by the neighborhood children. It was common to see Laurel surrounded by children, all eager to be in her company. She had a variety of talents, with a natural gift for singing that made her an integral part of the local church choir. Laurel was also a skilled dancer, having taken lessons at a local studio to perfect her craft. For her, singing and dancing were more than just pastimes, they were an essential part of her life. On the afternoon of August 6, 1975, the day began just like any other. Laurel and her siblings completed their morning chores, and Laurel left for work around 2 p.m. Her 12-year-old sister, Sarah, stayed home that day. Laurel's brother Bruce was married and stationed in California with the Army at the time, and one of her friends from Michigan was staying with the family. After finishing her shift at the snack bar around 10 p.m., Laurel was headed to meet friends at Adventureland Amusement Park, which was about a half-mile walk away. A coworker offered her a ride, but Laurel declined, choosing to walk instead. She was last seen walking toward the amusement park on the north side of North Webster. A family friend, Scott Pruitt, spotted her as she passed by the pillars marking the entrance to Epworth Forest. He waved at her, and she waved back before continuing past the pillars. That was the final confirmed sighting of Laurel Mitchell. Laurel never showed up to meet her friends at the amusement park, as they had decided to go to the county fair instead, which included the friend from Michigan. As a result, no one realized Laurel was missing until she didn't come home by midnight. Known for being responsible, Laurel would always call her parents if she were going to be late. When she still hadn't returned home by curfew, her family became worried. The situation became even clearer when the friend from Michigan arrived at the Mitchell home and asked, "Where is Laurel?" The friends thought she had gone home, and her family assumed she was with her friends. This misunderstanding led Laurel's parents, Richard and Wilma Mitchell, to report her as a missing person at 4:16 a.m. the following morning. The dispatcher took their information and assured them that a unit would be sent out to take the report. An extensive search was immediately launched by the police, as well as by Richard Mitchell, family members, and friends of Laurel. Richard himself walked the ditches along the road, worried that she might have been struck by a car and thrown into the side. Concerned neighbors and friends gathered to comb through the woods and check the roadsides, hoping to find any sign of Laurel. Investigators quickly concluded that Laurel never made it to Adventureland, suggesting that something must have happened to her on the way there. A few hours after she was reported missing, at around 10:30 a.m., a fisherman named Glenn Dixon and his son discovered a woman's body in the Elkhart River at the Mallard Bruce Public Access Site on Noble County Road 600 North, just west of 400 West. They immediately called 911. Officers waded into the water to retrieve the body, which was found face down on the west bank of the river near the boat landing ramp. The body was floating in about waist-deep water. State police initially could not identify the woman, but they estimated that the body had been in the water for about a day. They checked missing persons reports in the area that matched the victim's description. The woman was described as being 5 feet 5 inches tall, weighing about 160 pounds, with long brown hair. After further investigation, police identified her as Laurel Mitchell, based on a class ring from Lawsey High School, class of 1976, which was found on her. Her initials, LJM, were engraved inside the ring. At first, investigators believed the death might have been an accidental drowning, especially considering Laurel's reputation as a strong swimmer. However, this theory changed once the autopsy report came back. The autopsy was conducted later that same day, on August 7, 1975, by Dr. P.L. Sankey at Goshen General Hospital. The autopsy report revealed that Laurel had been forcibly drowned, and signs of assault were present. It also showed evidence that she had fought violently to survive. The police speculated that much of the evidence had been washed away by the water, as only a small bruise was found on her hand and a few abrasions under her arms. When the police arrived at Laurel's parents' home, Richard and Wilma were anxiously waiting for news about their daughter. They were not prepared for the devastating information the officers brought. As they learned the tragic fate of their daughter, Richard's eyes filled with tears, and Wilma was left inconsolable. Laurel's funeral became a poignant moment for the community of North Webster, as it highlighted the close-knit bond among the residents. The funeral home was overwhelmed with flowers, and the outpouring of support from the community was so great that there was no more room for the people who came to mourn her. The funeral for Laurel Mitchell drew an overwhelming crowd of well-wishers, friends, and family members who wanted to pay their respects. Due to the sheer number of people, the service had to be moved to the church. Laurel's sister, Sarah, recalled, "I don't remember the sermon at all. I just remember sitting between my dad and my brother, and they were both squeezing my hands so hard." As they left the church, they were met with the sight of people lined up down the street, many of whom couldn't fit inside the church. After the funeral, the investigation into Laurel's tragic death intensified, with detectives from various state and local agencies working tirelessly. They scoured through evidence and conducted numerous interviews. On August 9, 1975, a crucial call was received at 3:15 p.m. The caller had important information but abruptly hung up before they could provide full details or reveal their identity. This mysterious call further complicated the investigation, leaving more questions than answers. Investigators made an appeal for the person to contact them again, and they would do their best to keep her identity private. Police set up a headquarters for the continuing investigation in North Webster. One local witness, identified as Catherine Flynn, said around 10 p.m. that night she heard a loud car turn around next door. She said she heard voices say, "Let's get her." Investigators interviewed Catherine, who lived half a mile east of Epworth Forest on Epworth Forest Road. She said she was home on Wednesday, August 6, 1975, and that around 10 p.m. or a little later, an old car turned into the drive next door and turned around as it came back by her house. She informed investigators that she heard several voices say, "Let's get her." She said the car was very loud and probably a dark color. Another local, Frank Overmeyer, told investigators he also heard a loud vehicle in the neighborhood, possibly an Oldsmobile Cutlass. They went to interview Frank Overmeyer and his wife on August 14, 1975. The Overmeyers lived on Epworth Forest Road just west of Epworth Forest. Frank Overmeyer said on August 6, 1975, he was at home watching TV and heard a loud car go by, and the car turned around and stopped east of their house. Frank reported he then heard what he thought sounded like someone slamming the trunk on a car. Frank reported he turned on his porch light and stepped outside. When he stepped out, 2 cars were leaving the area. The first car was the one that had gone by his house that he described was a red-orange GM product, possibly an Oldsmobile Cutlass. The second vehicle was a medium green Mustang. The Oldsmobile was very loud and sounded like it was loud by design. All of the clothing and belongings found on Laurel's body were collected and preserved for DNA testing, including shoes, a sweatshirt, bra, underwear, and denim jeans. Unfortunately, due to the lack of DNA technology at the time, there was little that could be done with the clothing. Detectives from the Kosciuszko County Sheriff's Department and Indiana State Police examined the case closely through the years. The location of Laurel's abduction and the discovery of her body in the Elkhart River about 15 miles from Epworth Forest seemed to indicate that the perpetrator was familiar with the area. Many people were interviewed, and despite being a $5,000 reward offered, there was never enough evidence to charge anyone. As weeks turned into months and months into years, the case slowly faded from the headlines and went cold. For Laurel's family and friends, the pain of her loss remained. In February 2007, Indiana State Police Captain Kevin Smith was assigned as the lead investigator on Laurel's case. He was a man on a mission and was determined to provide answers that had eluded Laurel's family for so long. The pressure was on, but Captain Smith knew that he would do whatever it takes to give Laurel's loved ones the closure they deserved. Despite his best efforts, no new leads or evidence surfaced for several years, leaving him and his team frustrated. Then on January 16, 2012, Laurel's father, Richard Mitchell, passed away. He was a well-known public figure in North Webster. Laurel's mother, Wilma Mitchell, also passed away in February 2012. She operated the North Webster Food Pantry for several years. They passed never knowing what exactly happened to their 17-year-old daughter or why. It was a heartbreaking end for a couple who had dedicated their lives to seeking answers and closure for their daughter. In February 2013, a woman called Renee from Port Charlotte, Florida came forward and gave investigators a lot of useful information. Detective Donovan interviewed Renee on June 7, 2013. She informed the detective that she lived in Noble County as a teenager, and that she was 16 years old in 1975. She went on a date with a man named John Wayne Lehman. And while on the date, they went to a party. After the party, John Wayne Lehman was driving her home when Lehman admitted his involvement in a crime that he committed with his friend, Fred Bandy Jr. Lehman provided details of the crime to Renee that are consistent with the findings made by police where Laurel's body was found and the anatomical findings made by Dr. Sankey during the autopsy of her body. On July 3, 2014, investigators interviewed Bill McDonald at the Ligonier Police Department. Bill indicated that back in 1975, he was a sophomore at West Noble High School and that he socialized with a man named Fred Bandy Jr. Bill told investigators that Bandy told him that he had committed the crime that took place at Mallard's Roost, which was a public access site adjacent to the location where Laurel's body was found. Also in February 2014, Captain Kevin Smith received information about a local music group that performed in Epworth Forest the night of August 6, 1975. They were identified as the Celebrate the Sun group. This generated renewed interest in the case. Unfortunately, it did not lead anywhere. Captain Smith said, "I feel pretty confident after speaking with someone from that group. I don't believe they have information that will help." On September 25, 2019, Noble County Sheriff's Department Detective Joe Hutzel met with Rick Johnson to interview him about the Laurel Mitchell case. Rick Johnson informed Detective Hutzel that he was friends with Bill McDonald and that while he was in high school, he, Bill McDonald, Fred Bandy, John Wayne Lehman, and others were at a party together. While at the party, a conversation about the slaying of Laurel Mitchell came up, and Fred Bandy Jr. stated he and John Wayne Lehman committed that crime together. Investigators needed more than just reports from witnesses. They needed DNA evidence linking Bandy and Lehman to the crime. Advances had been made in cold cases in recent years due to new technology such as genetic genealogy, which involves putting a suspect or victim's DNA profile into a public database, allowing them to reverse engineer a family tree. This enables investigation of multiple branches of a family's tree to determine who could be a viable suspect in an unsolved case. Another recent advancement factoring into solving cold cases is the use of touch DNA samples. This method requires minuscule amounts of DNA, such as skin cells from the perpetrator that may be left on objects at a crime scene. A breakthrough enabling an accurate genotype from rootless hair is another technique now available. Until February 2019, forensic scientists were only able to extract DNA from hairs found at crime scenes if the root of the hair was attached. Unfortunately, most hairs do not have the root attached. This breakthrough in DNA extraction from rootless hair is extremely useful in solving crimes. Solving cold cases often involves a diligent and time-consuming re-examination of evidence from files and the efforts of experienced investigators. By February 2019, Laurel Mitchell's clothes and evidence were resubmitted for DNA testing. In February 2020, a certificate of analysis was generated by Indiana State Police Laboratory Division that showed a male DNA profile was developed from the clothing. After 3 suspects were eliminated as possibilities, attention shifted to Fred Bandy for a buccal swab. Bandy voluntarily provided the DNA sample on December 5, 2022 at his residence. On January 13, 2023, the state laboratory found that Fred Bandy Jr.'s buccal swab showed he is 13 billion times more likely to be the contributor of the DNA on Laurel Mitchell's clothing than any other unknown person. A review of Indiana State Police records also disclosed that Bandy was driving a 1971 Oldsmobile at the time, which is consistent with eyewitness statements from area residents on that fateful night. Investigators concluded that Lehman and Bandy, with premeditated malice, used Bandy's Oldsmobile to bring Laurel to the Mallard Roost public access site in Noble County, where they forcibly removed her from the vehicle and deliberately drowned her. While the Indiana State Police declined to comment on the specific techniques used to solve the case, Ashley Hall, the director of the Forensic Science graduate program at the University of California, explained. She said the method seemed to be a standard genetic identification technology used in crime labs called STR, or short tandem repeat. The technology is developing to become more and more sensitive. It is being developed to pick up smaller and smaller amounts of DNA. We can pick up much more DNA than we used to be able to. Laurel Mitchell's case is a good example of the power and evolution of DNA testing to assist in criminal investigations, Dr. Hull said. We're not done with our work until every family, every victim has an answer. And the fact that we can go back to cases that are this old, this is where we should be going, she said. Captain Kevin Smith, who has been working the case for over 20 years, said this case is a culmination of a 5 decades-long investigation, and science finally gave us the answers we needed. Playing a significant role in charges being filed was the Indiana State Police Laboratory Division. We simply could not have solved this case without them. He also said that the investigation of the case had followed a similar pattern of other such cases. Witnesses pass away. Memories fade. All those hurdles make it very difficult, especially when you go back this far. On Monday, February 6, 2023, the Indiana State Police arrested 67-year-old John Wayne Lehman and 67-year-old Fred Bandy Jr. It was announced to the public that John Lehman and Bandy Jr., both 67-year-old residents of Indiana, have been identified as the suspects responsible for what happened to Laurel Jean Mitchell. Bandy lived in 1014 5th Street in Goshen, Indiana, and Lehman lived at 108 Clark Street in Auburn, Indiana. Both are being held without bond at the Noble County Jail. This is not the first time that Fred Bandy Jr. is in trouble with law. He is a twice convicted child abuser and deemed a violent predator. In February 2001, he pleaded guilty to child solicitation and contributing to the delinquency of a minor. In February 2016, he pleaded guilty to 2 counts of child abuse and served nearly 6 years. During an initial hearing on February 8, 2023, Bandy and Lehman were informed by Noble Circuit Court Judge Michael Kramer they each face a charge of taking Laurel's life in the first degree. With current Indiana law, an individual convicted of such a charge faces a prison sentence between 45 and 65 years, with the advisory sentence being 55 years. However, since Laurel's slaying occurred in 1975, if the men are convicted, Bandy and Lehman could be sentenced to life in prison, which was the maximum possible prison sentence at that time. Also, during the initial hearing, a pretrial conference for both Bandy and Lehman was scheduled for 1:30 p.m. on April 24, 2023 in Noble County. Laurel's sister, Sarah, who was 12 years old back in 1975, recently did an interview with the New York Times after the arrests were made. She described their childhood in North Webster as typical before the horror visited her family. It was just a very small town, laid back. We felt safe, she said. We came and went as we pleased in the summer, and parents did not worry about us. She was a really good person. It's like, gosh, you picked somebody really good to do this to, somebody who could have done a lot of good in this world. I'm very glad they were finally arrested and very appreciative of the people who came forward. Sarah recalled how Captain Smith had carried around big books that detailed the names and addresses of everyone the authorities had interviewed over the years. There were over 1,000 names in there, she said. When Captain Smith called Sarah and her brother, Bruce Mitchell, to let them know they had arrested 2 men, she was surprised but mostly wished her parents had been alive to see it. 47 years had passed, but for Sarah Mitchell, the pain of that day remained as fresh as ever. Right now, it feels like yesterday, she said. On that fateful night when Laurel didn't return home, 12-year-old Sarah had somehow slept through the uncertainty. When she awoke the next morning, she was more confused than concerned, unaware of the nightmare that was about to unfold. She had a softball game that day, and despite the growing tension at home, her parents encouraged her to go. As Sarah played, focused on the game, she didn't know that her world was about to change forever. Halfway through, a neighbor woman appeared at the ball field in the Mitchell family car. I saw her pull up to the ball diamond, Sarah recalled. Immediately, Sarah told her coach she had to leave. The neighbor told her that she had been sent to pick her up, though Sarah was still unaware of what was going on. As they neared home, the sight of police cars surrounding the house stopped her in her tracks. The neighbor's somber words cut through the air. "They're here to look for your sister." Sarah's heart began to race. As they entered through the back door, she saw her father. Tears filled his eyes as he told her the unthinkable. Laurel was gone. "Gone?" Sarah asked, her mind struggling to grasp the reality of what he was saying. At just 12 years old, Sarah struggled to comprehend the devastating news. "Gone where?" she had wondered before her father finally broke the heartbreaking news. Her big sister Laurel, the one who always took care of her, as big sisters do, was gone. It was a realization that shook her to her core. Years later, when she saw the accused, Lehman and Bandy, in court, Sarah reflected on their appearances. At 12, they would have been scary. They look like very frail men, and I do not need to be afraid of them. Despite the eventual convictions of the men responsible for her sister's death, Sarah expressed that it did little to bring closure. "I'm glad they are going to be punished, that they won't be able to hurt anyone else, but she's still not coming back to us. Convictions would not bring closure for me. I do not think there is such a thing." For Sarah, the grief remains ongoing, a burden that can't be erased by the judicial process or the passing of time. She, like her family, would continue to mourn Laurel, knowing that no punishment could undo the tragedy that had torn their world apart. Moving on to the next case. Pretty Ashley Porter. Situated between Virginia, Tennessee, and South Carolina, North Carolina boasts stunning beaches along the Atlantic coastline as well as breathtaking mountain landscapes, including the Great Smoky Mountains. Yet, it is also a place filled with mysteries. Pretty Ashley Porter, who preferred to go by her middle name, was born on April 2, 1987, and led a relatively ordinary life. After completing her studies at Ashbrook High School in 2007, she took on various jobs in the manufacturing industry. Ashley maintained a relatively clean lifestyle. She stayed away from drugs, drank only occasionally, and never had any run-ins with the law. February began like any other month. That morning, she attended church with her mother, Tanya Davis. Later in the evening, they had dinner with extended family and Ashley's stepfather. Afterward, the 22-year-old spent some time online before heading over to chat with a neighbor. At 10 p.m., Ashley returned to her home on Windy Hill Drive in Gastonia, bid her mother goodnight, and went to her bedroom. The following morning, Tanya knocked on Ashley's bedroom door, intending to retrieve a coat from her daughter's closet. However, Ashley didn't respond. When Tanya tried the door, she discovered it was locked. Worried, Tanya and her husband forced the door open. Inside, they discovered that the screen from Ashley's bedroom window had been removed and was lying on the floor. Her handbag and cell phone were still there, but Ashley was nowhere to be found. It seemed that when she left that night, she hadn't taken anything with her. Her money remained untouched, and she hadn't packed a bag or taken any extra clothing. This indicated that Ashley hadn't planned to be gone for long and had likely intended to return. Tanya believed her daughter had climbed out of the window to meet someone, expecting to come back shortly after. She also noted that Ashley never used the window as a regular way to enter or exit their home. However, assuming her daughter was simply out with friends, Tanya didn't report her missing until April 27th, an entire week after she was last seen. Due to the limited information available in the case, it remains unclear whether Tanya attempted to contact Ashley's friends or conducted any searches for her daughter during this period. Additionally, after Ashley was reported missing, her family told the authorities that one of her ex-boyfriends was abusive and as a result was not welcome at her parents' house. This has led to speculation by both Tanya and online sleuths alike that Ashley snuck out to see this ex-boyfriend, or that he came to the window to see her and convince her to go with him. Armchair detectives have also, however, asked the question, why wait a week to report your daughter missing knowing that she had an abusive ex-boyfriend? Unfortunately, we have no answers to this question. Speaking in 2017, Tanya added, "It kinda makes you think, was it someone who was not comfortable with knocking at my door, ringing my doorbell that they would go to the window and get her attention instead of coming to the door? It is not normal, no, for her to go out the window." Initially, authorities did not believe that Ashley was in any danger, but this later changed and they now believe that the 22-year-old met with foul play. In 2017, they stated that they were keeping what they knew quiet so as not to jeopardize the case. Ashley's ex-boyfriend has never been publicly identified and it has not been revealed if he is a suspect or person of interest in the case. Since she went missing, Tanya has kept many of Ashley's belongings. Her room is now a playroom for her niece. Preeti Ashley Porter was last seen on the evening of April 19, 2009 at around 10 p.m. She said goodnight to her parents in their home on Windy Hill Drive in Gastonia, North Carolina before going to bed. Ashley is an African-American woman with black hair, brown eyes, and a piercing in each ear. She wore glasses sometimes, but didn't take them with her when she left her home. Ashley stands about 5'3" and weighed between 140 to 150 pounds when she was last seen. She has a tattoo on her buttocks, a burn scar on her left hand between her thumb and forefinger, and a mole in the center of her forehead. At the time she was last seen, she was wearing a 14-karat gold necklace with the name, Preeti, on it, a 14-karat gold necklace with a heart pendant, gray sneakers, and possibly jeans and a black t-shirt with the words, "Puts a ring on it." She goes by her middle name, Ashley. If she is still alive, Ashley would be 34 years old. Anyone with information regarding her disappearance can contact the Gastonia Police Department at 704-866-6702. Moving on to the next case. Roberto Caraballo. In the quiet town of Charlotte, Michigan, the mysterious death of Roberto Caraballo remained unsolved for over a decade until his charred remains were discovered in 2015. A critical DNA breakthrough would later reveal a startling truth, pointing to those who were closest to him. Roberto Caraballo, a 37-year-old from Charlotte, Michigan, had faced numerous personal challenges and legal troubles before his untimely death in February 2002. Roberto had served time in federal prison, though the specific reasons for his incarceration are not widely known. After his release, his life continued to be plagued by difficulties, including strained relationships and ongoing conflicts. He was married to Beverly McCallum, and their relationship was reportedly troubled, marked by discord and personal strife. Roberto lived with Beverly and her daughter, Dorene Ducharme, in a home on Horatio Street in Charlotte. In February 2002, investigators discovered a metal footlocker containing human remains. The remains were severely burned, making initial identification a challenge. Despite the evidence of the brutal slaying, including the presence of a hammer, pieces of a wooden baseball bat, and remnants of a plastic bag and rope, authorities struggled to piece together the full story. Forensic teams collected physical evidence from the crime scene, but the investigation initially brought forward very few leads. The investigation continued for years, with detectives diligently following leads and exploring various theories. Even with the extensive work, the case remained unsolved, and the identity of the victim was not known until several years later. The breakthrough in the case came in 2015, more than a decade after the slaying. Dorene Ducharme, who was serving a life sentence for first degree, reached out to authorities and provided crucial information implicating her mother, Beverly McCallum, and Christopher McMillan. This new information prompted a reinvestigation into the case. Advanced forensic techniques, including DNA analysis, were used to confirm the identity of Roberto and link the suspects to the crime. The information from Ducharme led to the identification of Roberto's remains and connected the suspects to the crime scene evidence. In May 2002, the basement of Roberto Caraballo's home in Charlotte, Michigan became the scene of a brutal crime. He was lured into the basement by his wife and her daughter. Accompanied by Christopher McMillan, the group had planned the violent attack. Beverly pushed Roberto down the basement stairs where her daughter struck him in the head with a hammer. Beverly then took over again, hitting Roberto repeatedly with the hammer until it became lodged in his head. Afterward, they suffocated him with a plastic bag and a rope. The body was then placed into a metal footlocker, driven to a remote location in Ottawa County, and set afire with gasoline. The remains were partially burned and left inside the locker, concealed in a blueberry field. In 2019, Christopher McMillan, a crucial figure in the case, was arrested and charged with second-degree and conspiracy to commit the slaying. McMillan, who had initially cooperated with authorities, provided pivotal testimony that implicated Beverly McCallum and Diane Ducharme in the February 2002 slaying of Roberto Caraballo. As part of a plea deal, McMillan pleaded guilty to the charges against him. His cooperation proved crucial in unraveling the events of May 2002, which included the brutal assault on Roberto and the subsequent disposal of his body. McMillan was eventually sentenced to 15 to 40 years in prison. Beverly McCallum's arrest came a year later in 2020, when she was apprehended in Italy, where she had been living under the radar since the crime. She was extradited to Michigan in 2022. Although McCallum maintained her innocence and her defense attorney argued that she was merely an accomplice, the jury convicted her of second-degree murder in April 2024. She was sentenced to 40 to 60 years in prison for the crime, along with an additional 10 to 15 years for disinterment and mutilation of a body. McCallum received credit for 1,500 days served, including her time in detention in Italy. Her sentencing marked the end of the long-running investigation, bringing a sense of justice to the case and closure to the victim's family. Moving on to the next case. Ruby Doss. In 1986, Ruby Doss was found strangled in Spokane's East Sprague area in Washington, leaving investigators with a cold case that seemed like it would never be solved. Over the years, the similarities between her case and other unsolved killings led to multiple false leads and dead ends. It seemed as though justice for Ruby might never be realized until a breakthrough in an unrelated crime unexpectedly uncovered new evidence, reigniting the search for her killer. Ruby J. Doss was a 27-year-old woman living in Spokane, Washington, in 1986. Originally from Detroit, Ruby had moved to Spokane in search of new opportunities and a fresh start. Before the crime that claimed her life, Ruby had been dealing with various personal struggles, including financial difficulties. To make ends meet, she worked as an escort, a choice that increased her vulnerability in an already dangerous world. Despite these hardships, Ruby remained hopeful and resilient, striving to create a better life for herself and her children. Sadly, Ruby's dreams would never be realized. On the rainy night of January 30th, 1986, Ruby J. Doss' life was tragically cut short. She was last seen in Spokane's East Sprague area, a neighborhood notorious for its high crime rates and transient population. As the night wore on, the weather grew colder and wetter, adding to the grim atmosphere of the evening. The details of Ruby's final hours remain unclear, but it is known that she was found in a field near the intersection of Fisk and Ferry, an isolated and poorly lit area. Her body was discovered by a transient who happened upon the scene. Ruby had been strangled, and the brutality of the crime was evident from the evidence at the scene. Her body showed clear signs of trauma, indicating a violent struggle before her death. Police arrived to find Ruby's body, confirming the signs of a brutal attack. The investigation quickly shifted focus to the details surrounding Ruby's murder, including identifying potential witnesses and gathering evidence from the crime scene. The evidence collected included fingerprints and DNA, although forensic technology at the time was limited. Early interviews with people who knew Ruby or might have witnessed something did not yield any substantial leads, leaving investigators searching for answers. As the investigation continued, detectives began to notice disturbing similarities between Ruby's case and several other unsolved murders in the Spokane area. Throughout 1986, several women, including Marian Turner and Dorothy Burdett, were found strangled in ways that seemed to follow a pattern. Marian, a convicted prostitute, was discovered strangled next to a garage on South Ivory in early November. Dorothy, a 62-year-old woman with no known criminal background, was found on Christmas Day in Highbridge Park. The common thread of strangulation and the similar circumstances surrounding these deaths led investigators to suspect that one individual might be responsible for all of these cases. Despite these connections, Ruby's case faced significant hurdles. The conditions of that night, along with the sparse evidence and lack of immediate witnesses, made the investigation especially difficult. The forensic evidence collected was limited, and the technology of the time did not allow for comprehensive DNA analysis or provided definitive links between the cases. The police explored various theories, including the possibility of a serial perpetrator operating in the region, but were unable to find conclusive evidence to tie the cases together. The lack of significant progress and the absence of new leads gradually caused Ruby's case to grow cold. The investigation continued sporadically, but with each passing year, the chances of solving the case seemed to diminish. The breakthrough in Ruby Dawes' case came more than 30 years after her brutal slaying, stemming from a seemingly unrelated investigation in a different state. By 2015, advancements in forensic technology had revolutionized the way law enforcement could analyze and match DNA evidence, providing new hope for cold cases. In a separate case, Richard Aguirre, then in his late 50s and a former police officer from Pasco, Washington, was under investigation for an assault that occurred in Franklin County. During this investigation, Aguirre's DNA was collected and entered into the National DNA Database, CODIS. In a stroke of luck, Aguirre's DNA profile was cross-referenced with DNA evidence collected from Ruby's crime scene. This pivotal match was made possible by advancements in DNA technology and the entry of evidence into the database, which had not been feasible at the time of the original investigation. The connection between Aguirre and Ruby's case was solidified when Spokane police obtained a search warrant for Aguirre's home. They collected new evidence, including items that could potentially link him to the crime. The renewed scrutiny and comparison of evidence confirmed that Aguirre was the prime suspect in Ruby's case. The discovery was a game-changer. It not only identified the man responsible for Ruby's demise, but also rekindled hope for the families of other victims who had remained unsolved. After remaining unsolved for nearly 3 decades, Aguirre was arrested in June 2015 for his involvement in the slaying of Ruby Dawes. The arrest was a major breakthrough for the Spokane police, who had long sought justice for Ruby and her family. Aguirre's trial began with intense scrutiny and high public interest. The prosecution presented a compelling case, highlighting the DNA evidence that linked Aguirre to the crime scene. But the trial was not without complications. The defense argued that Aguirre was not in Spokane at the time of the slaying, pointing to his military records and claiming that other DNA evidence found at the scene suggested multiple potential suspects. They contended that Aguirre's successful career as a police officer and his subsequent life should be considered in their defense. The trial took a turn when the jury was unable to reach a unanimous verdict, resulting in a mistrial in early 2021. Aguirre's case was retried in 2023, and he chose to waive his right to a jury trial. He opted instead for a bench trial where Spokane County Superior Court Judge Jeremy Schmidt would decide his fate. The second trial concluded with Aguirre being found guilty of first degree on December 26, 2023. The verdict came as a relief to Ruby Dawes' family, who had endured years of uncertainty and grief. On March 5, 2024, Richard Aguirre was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Judge Schmidt delivered the sentence, emphasizing the brutal nature of the crime and the lasting pain endured by Ruby's family. He acknowledged that no sentence could ever truly fill the void left by Ruby's death. Aguirre's defense attorney sought a reduced sentence, highlighting Aguirre's age at the time of the crime and his later positive contributions to society. They also pointed out the vulnerabilities Aguirre might face in prison, given his previous career in law enforcement. In the end, the judge imposed the maximum sentence allowed under the 1986 laws. The sentencing offered a bittersweet form of closure for Ruby Dawes' case. While it couldn't reverse the past or completely heal the scars left by her loss, it provided some measure of justice and resolution for her family. Ruby's oldest daughter, Lashunda Dawes Walker, shared her thoughts. "I'm not sure how much he understands that he was such an eraser. He changed the trajectory of my life and my sister's lives in such a major way." Latoya Dawes, another of Ruby's daughters, said, "This is not just a loss for me. It is a generational loss for my future family members." Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with me. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into unsolved mysteries. Your support helps me bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like me to cover next. See you in the next video, and remember, the search for truth never stops.